Don't be a fool. Grab your tool. What's up guys, welcome to another video. This one is going to outline the basic operation on the new recall that is out for certain Acura and Honda vehicles equipped with the J35 engine, the gasoline direct injection J35 engines. We're going to go over exactly what the procedure is on the vehicle. This is not an instructional video, however I have received a lot of direct messages and emails from Acura owners asking, you know, how severe is this recall, what is the repair procedure exactly, and the protocol into going into everything. So what we're going to do is we're going to tear down a vehicle with a J35 engine and just kind of show the basic operation of the inspection procedure and the possible routes that American Honda wants you to take in regards to the findings of the bearings themselves. These are engine bearings. Rod bearings to be specific. And basically what the recall has you do is tear down the engine to the point where you can remove those from the connecting rods and then inspect them and send them off to Honda for remote inspection. And based on their findings, they are going to direct the technician which route to go. So again, not an instructional video, just an informative one. So let's get the car up on the hoist and then we will get it torn down. Okay, so as you guys can see now, we have our crankcase exposed and the connecting rods all exposed and accessible. And what we do is we go down the line from cylinders 1 down to cylinder 6, undoing each rod cap, and then at that point then we can remove the bearing from the cap, place them in the bearing inspection trays, and then take some photos and shoot those off to the experts. Okay, cylinder 1 coming out. So we need to push the connecting rod and piston up into the bore so that we could slide it out, slide the bearing out on the upper half of the rod. There we go. Here is the upper half of the connecting rod bearing. Looks to be okay to me. And we'll basically do that on each cylinder going down the line. And once we have them all out, then as I said, we place them in the bearing inspection tray. And then we will shoot those off to the experts over at Honda. So I'm going to go ahead and tear all these out, and then once they're out, then we'll be checking back in. Just for everybody who is unfamiliar or really has no experience with engines and just wants to know, you know, what an engine bearing is, basically the rod bearing that we just removed from cylinder 1 rod right here, this thing that's dangling, pay no mind to this. This is just a special tool that we use to push the rod up into the bore and then back down and pull it back down so we could access and remove the rod bearing. That right there is what you were looking at, is known as a bare connecting rod, because the bearing, this thing, is now removed from it. So what happens on some of these cars is that these bearings experience premature wear and tear. I haven't heard of any concrete answers as to why. All I have read about is it's being referred to as a improper manufacturing, is I think the correct terminology and wording that's in the recall and public service bulletin recall. Anyway, so this is now bare, and this connecting rod rides on what's known as the crankshaft journal. This is the rod journal right here, and as you can see, it's highly polished. Just kind of like try to wipe it, but as you can see, it's like a mirror finish, micro polish on the crankshaft rod journal. And the way that these bearings work is it's known as a journal bearing. So if you've ever heard the term, you know, ball bearing is a sealed bearing with little balls on it in an inner race and an outer race, and that bearing, as it spins, you know, it actually rides on those balls inside of the ball bearing and some grease and what have you. They're non-serviceable, and they're basically typically sealed units, most commonly. Anyway, this is a rod journal bearing. So a journal bearing actually uses a special coating to make it ultra slick, and the crankshaft again is micro polish, so that's a fine polish. I mean, if we were to get all the oil off of this, it would almost look like a mirror. And this bearing gets installed on there, and as you can see, there's like little to zero resistance. Friction is not there, and the oil pump will actually pump oil through the crankshaft and out through little orifices on the rod, or on the crankshaft rod journal. So oil will squirt out through these little holes over here, and then a thin film of oil will actually ride on the bearing surface. So this crankshaft is essentially riding on a very thin layer of oil. And so what happens over time on some certain models, or some certain engines, I should say, is these bearings experience premature wear. And when that happens, then you run the high risk of damaging the micro polish that is on the crankshaft. Again, this portion. Once that's damaged, and the general rule of thumb, the first day of a mechanics class, is if you could run your pinky nail across the rod journal right there, and your pinky nail catches, it's done. You either have to get it re-micro polished or replace the crank or what have you. So what we're having to do on these specific vehicles is basically tear the engine down to this point and inspect every single rod bearing and based on the inspection results, we'll determine whether or not it is just a rod bearing set replacement, or the other route that could happen is that you would, if a bearing were to be found damaged. I have an example. Hold on. So as you can see, there's a lot of copper showing through, and the finish is getting worn out. So even though that this engine came in running okay, you know, the bearing inspection proved it to be needing a crankshaft replacement as well. So we actually had to tear the engine down further to dismantle the complete lower rotating assembly, replace the crankshaft, which is this major component right here, all the bearings, and then reassemble everything. Those are the two routes that are most common. Another third route is that if the vehicle experiences engine lockup due to damaged bearings, then at that point the engine's done. It sends shrapnel and metal fragments all through the oil galleries and everything, and then so the entire long block as an assembly is replaced at that point. So if the engine locks up and shuts down on the highway or something and blows a window through the block, then at that point it is non-salvageable. We are replacing long blocks. There's quite a lot of cars out there that this affects just because the J35 engine has been around for like 3 decades, and this is the last iteration of it. And a few have experienced failures, and so American Honda recognized a fault and issued a recall, which is what we're doing now. But that's just a general rundown. After I have all of these out, as I said, we'll go ahead and shoot those pictures off to the bearing inspection team, and then at that point we will decide what to do with this specific engine based on number one. If all the bearings look like this, in my experience, it's just rod bearing replacement. So I'll get this all torn down, and then we'll touch back in when it's ready to go back together. There's a very specific way of which these rod bolts are torqued and angled. There's a very specific way in which these bearings are installed. So again, not an instructional video. However, this is only allowed to be performed by certified Honda and Acura technicians of a certain training level. So yeah, that's basically the rundown of the bearing and inspection, and we'll go ahead and just get it torn down and touch back in when everything's back together. Okay, so I am on my last bearing install, ending at cylinder number 1. I have all the other connecting rod bearings installed. This one was deemed to be just rod bearing replacement. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the procedure that I go through by installing this last rod bearing on the upper rod half and the lower bearing cap. It's also noted that these engines have a specific engine code that is stamped on the very front portion of the cylinder block. Similar to like B series and K series engines, you're looking at that same specific area on the J series. Based on that specific code determines what color bearing is required to be replaced on to this specific engine. So I'll go ahead and go through the procedure that I go through. Once again, not an instructional video, but this is just what I do. So let's go ahead and get the bearings installed on this final connecting rod. So I start with the upper half, and the tang, locating tang, gets placed, and then the bearing kind of just gets pushed up into place. Before I push that assembly upwards and then back down onto the crank and journal, I'm going to go ahead and apply just a tiny bit of oil onto the connecting rod bearing. I like to use my bare hands with this just because like things get slippery, and you get a really good feel for it just using your bare hands rather than latex gloves. Everything's got to be done to a clean and meticulous standard. I'll just make sure that no dust or debris is like floated into the holes or anything. and I'll go ahead and carefully push this up, swing it forward, carefully pull it down onto the rod journal. There we go. Okay, so now it's the time to replace the lower rod cap bearing. It's done in the same fashion. I'm sorry if this doesn't focus, but connecting rod tang gets located like that. And then pushed into place. And then another light coat of oil will go on here. And these bearings, or bearing caps, they go a specific way onto the rod bearing. Again, this is not a instructional video. However, I thought it would be interesting to touch on the fact that these are what's known as fracture brake connecting rods, meaning that they're not assembled, but they are manufactured in one piece, meaning that the lower half of the rod is one piece, and then they fracture break them right down the center to make a stronger bond. As you can see, it's not like a perfect machined finish, but there are actually little ridges in there and imperfections from where they fractured it. So I'll go ahead and get this installed and then torque. Okay, there is a pre-torque procedure on both connecting rod bolts. It's a very low torque, but after they are both torqued, then they get angled. So this is the pre-torque. So now I'll break out the tech angle gauge, torque wrench, and then get it angled. All right, so I got my tech angle torque wrench set to 90 degrees, and I will angle these and place them in their final, hopefully final, resting position. That's one. Go. Okay, so now that all the bearings have been replaced, it is time to put this back together and fire up, and she should be good for another however many thousand miles. We'll go ahead and button this up, and then we'll check back in, and I'll have some final closing thoughts about the entire recall procedure and what I think about it. Okay, so that about wraps it up for the rod bearing inspection recall on the affected Honda and Acura vehicles. In this video, we went through pretty much everything that's in the recall. We went through all the different parts of the engine, from the crankshaft to the bearings, and we went through what type of bearing wear can occur, from the good to the bad, and then we've gone through the routes of action that's required to be taken based on those results. Again, it's either going to be just rod bearing replacement, or if they look like that, it'll probably be crankshaft replacement. As far as what I think about the recall, I think that it's absolutely necessary. Obviously, I mean, Honda's stepping up and they're recognizing a fault, and they're rectifying it by doing this repair that is, proven to work. As far as what I think it'll do for the brand, I mean, everybody every auto manufacturer has their pitfalls, or has their issues, should I say. I mean, take a look at Toyota. Their 2022 to 2024 Tundras, their engines are spinning main bearings. That's this big journal right here, and that's causing engines to lock up. So they issued a recall for 100,000 cars and trucks to have those complete engines replaced. No inspection procedure as far as I know. They're just replacing them. So and then take a look at, if you've ever owned an M car, a BMW M car, then you know that if you had like an S54 engine and a E46 M3, then you know that you're not buying that car, or you're not owning that car, unless you know that those rod bearings have been replaced at some point. And even if they have, then you know you're into it. You're going to be replacing those rod bearings every 100,000 miles. Same with Volkswagen, Audi. You know, they have their issues as well. Porsche has their issues as well. But as far as the issue with the crankshaft replacement, I think, this is just my opinion, I think that this type of operation that's done to a vehicle, if I'm shopping around for a TLX, MDX, or whatever Honda has this engine, and I know that there was a manufacturer recall for this, I would probably stray away from the car if I know that the crankshaft was replaced as the repair. If it was just rod bearing replacement, whatever. I mean, I'll take that all day. But when it comes to this, the reason why I say that is because when with my experience building engines, I built an NSX engine back 10 years ago or so, whatever. It was forged internals and turbocharged, and yeah, it was a C30A. And when I built that engine, obviously taking this stuff apart was part of that, but going back together, it wasn't just, okay, let me take this out, put it back in the car, bolt it all back up, torque everything, and fire it up. No. When I built that engine, it was, you know, I sent this out with the flywheel, I sent it out with the damper pulley and the pistons, and the whole rotating assembly got blueprinted and balanced. I went as far as miking the crank to make sure that it was true. I went as far as plastic gauging the rod and main bearings to make sure that the oil passages or the oil clearances were in spec, and you know, making sure that the bore was true. And yeah, so building engines, that's the way it should be. So this is what I consider, you know, part of building an engine. And so it shouldn't, I don't know, I was just always taught it should never be just a swippity swappity type of thing. That's why I would say, if it were me, in my opinion, if I was shopping around for a used Acura with a J35 engine like this, I would stray away from it if I had proof that, okay, well, the recall's been done, but they replaced the crankshaft. You know, let me just go look around somewhere else. I don't want that one. Just cause, you know, that's pretty major. But yeah, those are just my thoughts and my opinions. That'll about wrap it up for this video. If you like what you saw and you thought it was informative, consider smashing that like button, hitting that subscribe button. I'm thinking about getting back on YouTube a little bit more, so if you like this video specifically and the content within it, then leave a comment in the comment section below, and maybe I'll make a little bit more videos like this one that you saw today, specifically Honda stuff, taking stuff apart, putting it back together, that type of stuff. But yeah, until the next one, see ya. And I know that there's going to be some comment section of, why do I have my electric impact wrapped up in plastic? And it's because when we do this recall, there's so much oil that just pisses all over the place. It ends up getting all over your arms, your body, and your very expensive power tools. And so I do this as a precautionary measure to extend the life of my impact gun. So it's a nice little hack that I've found works very well. Keeps the tool clean and makes the job go smoother, I suppose. But yeah, that's why. Don't be a fool. Grab your tool.